morning and welcome to our talk show, Good Morning Greyhounds. I'm your host, Sydney Smith. Next week is the 100th anniversary of our student newspaper, The Reflector, so I am joined by Kassandra Darnell, the editor-in-chief. How are you today?
I'm good, Sydney. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much. So next week, as I mentioned, is that anniversary. What kinds of things are you guys doing to celebrate?
So next week we are actually doing a anniversary dinner gala sort of event that's being put on by the university's PR graduate students. That initiative is led by Professor Ray Begovich, and this has been something that's been in production for a while. I've known about it since the summer, and I've been consulted on various different matters, including like an official 100-year anniversary logo that was done for the university, speeches that are going into the program, that kind of thing. There are going to be lots of archive front pages exhibited throughout the dinner, and then there will be guest speakers, myself included, during the program that are going to look at old headlines, old excerpts from the paper and that kind of thing, and talking about the history of the Reflector as a whole. I'm going to be involved in that. Professor Criswell, who is our advisor, is going to be involved in that as well as some current staff members like our photo editor McKenna Machino, our sports editor Connor Mahoney, and former editor-in-chief and now graduate public relations student Jacob Walton will be involved in that as well.
That sounds like a super exciting event. So what kinds of things have you been doing in preparation for this event? I know we had talked previously and you had mentioned that you were including some 100th anniversary stuff in your issues. Is that kind of going into this event?
Yeah, so going into the event in particular, we've kind of just been practicing our speaking pieces for the event. I myself will be doing a speech to conclude the dinner, but myself and my managing editor, Olivia Cameron, have gone and decided that throughout the entire year we're going to pull archive front pages from the past 100 years and run a retrospective page on our back page of every issue of the paper. And that's just kind of pulling those archive front pages and based on some stories that are on those front pages, writing some retrospective pieces that reflect on those stories in particular, how our coverage has changed, and how the university has changed. Some examples would be, we did one recently about the history of the football program, another one about the university's former yearbook, The Oracle, which has since been decommissioned, and looking at how the Reflector has been involved in the history of the university, not just its own history.
Okay, yeah, so that's super cool to see that history, and as editor-in-chief, I'm sure that is super exciting to come back to and bring it all together. So do you feel any kind of pressure when it comes to that, or how does that make you feel when you are overseeing kind of all of this?
Definitely going into the 100-year anniversary of the paper, I would say that there is kind of a legacy to live up to, a lot of big shoes to fill, while I am in contact with a lot of Reflector alumni, including past editors-in-chief, including Noah Crenshaw and Jaden Kennett, as well as Jacob Walton that I previously mentioned. There's definitely big shoes to fill, and with this 100-year anniversary, I want to make sure that I'm doing a good job of representing the legacy of the Reflector and everything that we've done in the past, but also trying to issue in a future for the Reflector as well, because print news is constantly evolving and changing and having to adapt as the times change and adapt. So trying to look into more online coverage, social media coverage, that kind of thing, to make sure that people are still involved in print journalism.
For sure, and you mentioned that you are still in contact with the previous editors-in-chiefs. So how have they helped or mentored you to get to this position that you are in?
I would definitely say the most hands-on mentoring I had came from Jacob Walton. He was the editor-in-chief last academic year when I was the news editor, and I did a lot of work with him throughout the year, kind of shadowing him, especially once I was officially announced to be the editor-in-chief for this academic year. But I also have reached out to Noah Crenshaw and Jaden Kennett on several occasions to kind of get an idea of what ideas they had when they were leading the paper that they wanted to implement or never got around to doing it. Obviously asking lots of questions about how to best serve the UIndy community and what kind of coverage they did that they felt was really beneficial and things along those lines.
Yeah, I bet that is super helpful to have those mentors and especially that whole network of community of newspaper editors. That's so cool to hear. You also mentioned earlier that print is constantly evolving, and you mentioned that you are currently on social media and the website. So how does that kind of work for the Reflector? Like, what kinds of things do you put out on the digital world?
So print journalism is something that over the years has definitely been put in question about whether or not print is something that is going to survive or is going to die. And I believe that at the end of the day, print simply has to adapt. So when it comes to online coverage, we make sure that every issue we put all of our stories online to our Reflector website. We also have some online exclusive content. The entertainment section, we run reviews for movies, albums, TV, that kind of thing that are exclusively online. And we're looking to try and do more online native content, things that are strictly online, trying to get our section editors to pitch more online stories so that readers have something that they can look at that's not just going to be in the physical copy of the paper. Sure. In regards to social media, we've been trying to post on social media more, kind of get those lead paragraphs into Instagram captions and tweets and Facebook posts, that kind of thing. Some more coverage on Instagram stories, including most recently this week, I was working with TV and WICR radio to do some midterm election coverage, and I was live blogging on the Reflector website as the night went on, pulling quotes from TV and from radio, who you guys and radio were on scene at the events, so that really enriched the content that I was able to put on the website and live tweeting and posting on Instagram as we go through. So that's something that we need to implement more in order to usher in a future for print.
For sure, yeah. It's super cool to see how that has evolved, and especially coming together with other news sources, I think is super important and super awesome to see. So you kind of mentioned the outline for your online programs. What about your print papers? So what kind of goes into that outline or story making process?
So for print, we're currently a roughly bi-weekly print newspaper. I say roughly just because UIndy has different breaks and that kind of thing with fall break, Thanksgiving break, days off that kind of interrupt that production process on occasion. But for the most part, that process begins with a story meeting. Section editors will come through and they will pitch their story ideas to myself and my managing editor, Olivia Cameron. And we will kind of decide if we think stories need to be more developed before they go into the paper, whether or not we think they're timely or if they're more evergreen or timeless, that kind of thing. And we will pitch those stories and create a story budget for the entire issue. And usually the editorial staff gets first pick for those stories just because they're the ones that are there when they're initially pitched. And then at the start of that process, we will pitch them to all of the rest of the students who are newcomers coming on to staff, and they will take those stories as well. We also have a lot of photo and graphic content to make sure that there are visual elements that go with the stories that we put in the paper, because something really important with print journalism is the fact that the biggest things people look at are headlines, photos, graphics, and captions. If somebody decides that they're only going to look at the first paragraph of a story, they're still definitely going to look at a graphic that goes along with it. So those are just as important that we make sure that people take those assignments. And then throughout that first week, everybody goes and they get their interviews, they write their stories, all that jazz. And then the second week, we get into production week, and that's editing stories, making sure things are getting up to snuff, creating rough drafts of those pages, and making sure everything's in line and ready to go. And then that Friday, we have Production Friday, where the entire editorial staff is in the newsroom together for several hours, making sure that the paper is ready to go to print. And it's a lot of doing finalization or final edits to stories and to pages, making sure everything looks good, getting a lot of proofreading and fact checking done. We have I think currently we have 12 editorial staff members, and every single set of eyes looks at every single story before it goes to print. Same with our graphics, same with our captions, same with our pages. And not only is it a great learning experience for everybody that goes through it, but it also ensures that we have a credible paper to produce every issue. And then at the end of that process, myself and my managing editor, Olivia, we go through and we make sure that everything is clean, concise, well put together, and then that Sunday we send it to the printer. Everything gets scheduled to go onto the online site, and then on Wednesday we distribute the paper.
Awesome. Yeah, so that sounds like a lot goes into this paper, which
Yeah.
is super important. What kind of things go into printing the paper specifically? Like, where do you print it at, and where can students or staff or anybody find your paper?
Yeah, so when it comes to printing, we collaborate with the Greenfield Reporter. They have a printing press that we have been more than grateful. They've been generously letting us use their printer for a price, of course. With the Greenfield Reporter, and every issue I make sure that all those pages are finalized and I send them to their server. Those get printed, they get sent to us on Tuesday, and then they're ready to be distributed.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a lot of things that you do, like responsibilities such as sending those things to the printer or looking over everybody's work. What kinds of other things do you do as editor-in-chief?
For the most part, it is looking through everything and making sure that everything is going smoothly with the paper. A lot of what has to do with editor-in-chief is being a leader for that group. So not only, kind of deciding what goes into, or helping to decide what goes into the paper, helping people to kind of more develop their story ideas, develop their pages. A lot of it is mentoring and teaching. My managing editor and I always joke that we need a third person that just sits there and answers questions for people, just because we have so many people on staff ask us questions constantly. Throughout the production process. It's kind of our job to be a bit of an expert, but also, of course, solving any problems that come up during the production process, making sure that everybody's in communication with each other. When you have a paper in a production process that is this intricate, and I'm trying to think of the correct word, intricate, lots of things going into it, it's important that we all communicate with each other, and if there are any problems, they get solved very quickly. So it's my job and my managing editor's job to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And if people need help, we provide that help. And if people need support, we provide that support.
That sounds amazing to hear on a newspaper staff, and it sounds like you all are kind of close-knit, and I love to see that, especially in a communication setting with newspaper, journalism, just about everything. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We will be right back after a short break here on Good Morning Greyhounds. I am joined by Kassandra, the editor-in-chief of the Reflector. So we were talking a little bit about the layout of the paper, but what kinds of things have been super popular in previous issues? For example, were there any breaking news stories that made big headlines or anything like that?
I definitely think some of the more popular stories, at least these past couple of issues, especially when looking at like analytics on the website, surprisingly, some of our best stories have to be our reviews that are only on the website. A lot of people actually look at those a lot. But when handing out the paper and doing distribution, one headline that really stuck out was when we ran above the fold on the front page about Corey Vitangeli resigning and how Student Affairs is working to fill that hole in Student Affairs. So a lot of people picked that up because she was a big face on campus and a big face in Student Affairs. And that story focused a lot on, because she had such a big role to play in Student Affairs, how are they kind of filling that hole and making up for that loss? And how are they changing Student Affairs and adapting in the wake of her resignation? So that was a big headline for sure. Another one was when we wrote this previous issue. It was written about the Senate Bill 1 that was passed over the summer that had to do with restricting abortion access in Indiana. That was one of our more Hoosier news stories, one of those statewide stories that was very popular just because it was such a hot button topic. So a lot of those bigger issues are things that have been more in conversation, not only on campus, but like in the community, have been bigger stories for us, for sure.
Yeah, and how do you cover these touchy or controversial topics per se?
Definitely with a careful hand, for sure. When looking at these topics, we make sure that typically we try to have a seasoned staff member write these stories when they go into these issues. I personally write a lot of the political pieces and a lot of the bigger pieces just because I know that I can handle it really well. But we have a lot of people on staff, especially editorial staff, that want to be taking these bigger stories, so I definitely help them along through that process if need be. A lot of it is looking at ethics things and news judgment, and also doing a lot of research, especially when it comes to those House and Senate bill stories. There's a lot of research that goes into those to make sure you get all the facts correct, and talking to state representatives and that kind of thing can be very nerve-wracking as well. So just wanting to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row with your research and your facts and everything. There's definitely a lot of fact-checking that goes into it, lots of double-checking. We have some great editorial assistants on our team this year, and a big part of what our editorial assistants do is to double-check all those facts for everybody. And with those more controversial stories, our advisor, Professor Jean Criswell, is a huge help during the production week if we think that there are some things that may come up regarding ethics or legality or clarity in those kinds of things. Jean always sees those stories before they go in the paper to make sure that we have covered every base. And if we need to have a lawyer look at it to make sure that everything is correct legal-wise, then that's what we do. We want to make sure that the news that we put out there is fair and ethical and correct.
That is awesome to hear from a college news source, and really impressive. I love that for you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you mentioned your advisor, Jean Criswell. What kind of role does she play for your newspaper staff?
Right. So Jean Criswell, as I said, is our advisor. The Reflector is student-run media, so for the most part, it is student-run. A lot of the things that go into that paper are crafted and created by students for students, but Jean is there to advise any kind of questions that we may have about logistics of a story, possible sources when we can't think of somebody that we could speak to. Again, making sure that things are looked at to make sure that they are ethical, credible, legally correct, that kind of thing. And also just making sure that if there's any hiccups in the production process, and myself or my managing editor Olivia get really stressed about those things going on, Jean is there to support us and make sure that we have somebody on our team that's like more than willing to root for us and help us get through the production process. She's an invaluable part of this paper, just like all of the students that are a part of it are an invaluable aspect of it as well.
That is so sweet to hear. I love that. It sounds like you guys are, I've mentioned this a couple times already, but it sounds like you're super tight-knit, and I love that. What is the community kind of like in the editing room? Is it?
It's very close.
Tight-knit,
the newsroom is very close, especially amongst editorial staff. Because of the way the class is structured, editorial staff is in like the computer desk office area of the newsroom during class when we have it 3 days a week, and we're definitely working on things that need to get done during the production process. And all of the folks that are new to the class are listening to Jean lecture as well. But sometimes we'll give announcements during class. We'll do our story meeting and pitch to the folks. If people need help doing their edits, the newcomers need help doing their edits, we'll take them out in the hallway and we'll discuss them with them, that kind of thing. But the editorial staff in particular is very close because we spend a lot of time together, especially with Production Fridays. We are in the newsroom from anywhere to I want to say 6 to 12 hours on
Oh,
those
wow.
Fridays,
That's impressive.
completely depending on how production goes. This is one of those things that's different every single time. If a fact is wrong, that's going to put a halt in the whole process because everybody has to look at everything. So it kind of creates a bit of incentive to make sure that things are correct and done well. But I believe that Reflector is one big family. When you come into the newsroom, even after you graduate, you take the newsroom with you for sure. As I mentioned earlier, I'm friends with a lot of Reflector alumni that still always want to hear about the different coverage that we have going on. Recently, one of our former managing editors, Taylor Stranad, who is a graduate student in Ohio, stopped by and said hello to me on Production Friday to just kind of help me calm down because it was a very stressful production. But myself and my managing editor, Olivia, are very adamant about making sure that we have a workplace that is kind and respectful and communicative because we want Reflector to be a family and we want us to be tight-knit, especially considering we spend so much time together. So anything that comes along with like conflict resolution, those kinds of things, or even just wanting to hang out with each other, spend some time together in the newsroom. Actually, I'm trying to plan right now a Thanksgiving for everybody.
That's so cool, yeah.
In the newsroom. We do Secret Santa every year with Jean. It's always a very big deal if you get Jean for Secret Santa, but it's all really fun and we're all really close with each other.
Yeah, it sounds like a super fun and tight-knit community to be a part of, which is amazing to see. So another question kind of leading up to that, how do you prepare your editorial staff? Like when they first start, what is the steps to train them up to speed?
Oof. There's a lot.
For sure.
One of the things we do in order to train our editorial staff is we do our welcome week issue. So during August, before the semester has even started, those who are part of the editorial staff, they find out their positions in April before the end of the prior semester, and they're expected to be on campus in August for the Welcome Week issue, and it is a half-size issue. Right now we're currently sitting at an 8-page paper, so our Welcome Week issue is always 4 pages. And so it gives them the opportunity to learn how to find story ideas, pitch story ideas, edit stories, create drafts of pages, create graphics, take photos, come up with captions, come up with headlines, figure out how they're going to format their pages. I always joke that making pages is like one big game of Tetris. So a big part of Welcome Week is learning how to play Tetris with the pages. And also just establishing those connections within the newsroom as well and kind of creating that community. But a big part of training is Welcome Week. But as the editor-in-chief and my managing editor as well, Olivia, we end up doing a lot of the training during that process because we are considered the experts in the room. We have page design experience, that kind of thing. And a lovely thing about the Reflector is you can come in and be an editor without having any page design experience because we will teach you. Last year I was the news editor and I had never designed a page in my life.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly I had to design 3 of them.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Every issue. And so it's something that you have to pick up really quickly, and so as the editor-in-chief you need to be able to teach them that very quickly as well.
Yeah, so I've heard that you have had a bunch of new editors join your staff. How has that been in this past semester?
Yes, the start of this semester was definitely a rocky one. Jean says all the time that we got obliterated by graduation last year just because we had a lot of really great people who had been with the paper for a very long time graduate and go on to bigger and better things, and we're infinitely proud of them for doing so. But this year we started out with 6 open positions,
Oh, wow.
and we have, I'm trying to remember if it's 12 or 13 positions total on staff.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So with the Welcome Week issue in particular, myself and Olivia, we had to wear a lot of different hats, which is something that you need to learn how to do in this industry anyway. You need to be able to pick up and do almost anything on a paper. So I was acting as kind of an interim news editor because I had done it before, and Olivia was acting as our interim opinion editor and graphics graphics editor because she had experience with both of those things. She had been the opinion editor before, and she'd done a lot of things with graphics. So we had to wear a lot of different hats. And then instead of training all the people that filled those positions during welcome week like we would before the semester, because interviews weren't until after the semester had started, we had to train them on that first full issue of the paper. And while that was a really stressful time, again, you gotta be able to pick that up really quickly. So Olivia and I had to be able to teach it to them really quickly. And so I think that experience honestly was really invaluable because it teaches the people that came onto staff how to pick things up very quickly, but it also taught Olivia and I how to be good mentors and actually lead this staff in a way that will be beneficial to them.
For sure. And what kinds of things do you have to do as that leader for them? How do you think you've taken your past mentorships into mentoring these new editorial staff?
I definitely think that my past experiences on the paper, as well as the different past editors-in-chief that I've spoken to, have contributed a lot to like my leadership management style. I believe I mentioned this, but Olivia and I, my managing editor, were big proponents of respect and kindness on this paper and within this newsroom, because especially when you have a group that is that tight-knit and that spends that much time together, if there is conflict, it's gonna create some big wedges in the newsroom that are gonna be kind of hard to get past. So a lot of it is making sure that Olivia and I are kind and caring and respectful and understanding, of course, as leaders, but also making sure that everybody on the editorial staff is very kind and respectful to each other as well. And a big part of running a newspaper and being a part of a newspaper is communication, because everybody's doing a million different things and people are in charge of a million different things, and you have to make sure that you're constantly in contact with each other so that you know what's going on at all times with your section. So if there's any issues with communication, making sure we nip that in the bud and having everybody like talk to each other, and also providing a lot of support for people. Newspaper is a very stressful thing. You have a lot of deadlines on top of taking however many classes you have to take, and you have to practice a lot of time management. So if we have editors that are experiencing a lot of stress in regards to newspaper, we always ask that they come to me and Olivia, and if they need to put something on our shoulders so that they can get things done, then that's what we do.
Yeah, that sounds awesome to have that kind of support system in this tight-knit community. And I think that's super important, especially when sharing news stories like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That is all we have time for. Tune in next Tuesday, November 15th on UIndy TV YouTube to see the 100th anniversary dinner for the Reflector. Congratulations again for making it this far and for being in charge of this big thing. So that is all we have for this morning on Good Morning Greyhounds. This is Cassandra. I'm Sydney Smith. Have a great day.